Commander Veltar stood at the edge of the training deck watching the new batch of cadets file into formation. His forearms crossed behind his back as his golden eyes swept across the mixed group of young beings from across the galaxy. Altarians, like himself, stood tall with their metallic skin gleaming under the station lights. The reptilian Vegans moved with careful precision, while the multi-armed Centauri cadets chatted quietly among themselves. At the back of the group, he noticed several humans walking together in small clusters, the Galactic Defense Academy on station. Kepler's 7th had been his home for 15 standard years. In all that time, Veltar had maintained one simple rule that governed everything he did. Every cadet received exactly the same treatment regardless of what planet they came from or what species they belonged to. The same training schedule, the same equipment, the same expectations, the same consequences for failure or success. Listen carefully, Veltar announced as his voice echoed across the vast training hall. You are here because your homeworlds believe you have what it takes to defend this galaxy. I do not care if you breathe oxygen or methane. I do not care if you have 2 arms or 6. I do not care if your skin is made of scales or synthetic fibers. In my academy, every single cadet follows identical rules and uses identical equipment. He gestured toward the rows of training stations that lined the hall. Each station contained the same setup. Standard-issue plasma rifles designed to work for any species with opposable digits. Combat suits that adjusted automatically to different body types. Training dummies built to simulate various enemy types. Weapon maintenance kits with universal tools. Everything had been carefully designed by the best engineers in the galaxy to work equally well for any being. You will notice that some cadets from other academies might tell you stories about special treatment or modified equipment. Veltar continued. Forget those stories. Here we believe that true equality means identical treatment. If you cannot handle the same challenges as every other cadet, then perhaps you do not belong in the Galactic Defense Force. Among the human cadets near the back, a young woman named Lihana listened quietly. She had arrived just 3 days ago, on a transport from the preliminary academy on Titan Station. Her black hair was pulled back in the regulation style, and her dark eyes stayed focused on the commander as he spoke. Next to her stood Kim Do-yun, who had become her first friend at the academy. He kept glancing around nervously at all the different species surrounding them. The first thing you need to understand, Veltar said, as he began walking between the rows of cadets, is that weakness in one cadet endangers the entire unit. If your equipment fails because you cannot handle it properly, then your squad mates might die in real combat. This is why we use standardized gear that works the same way for everyone. He stopped in front of a vegan cadet named Yoon Jiwoo, whose reptilian features remained completely still. Cadet, what is your primary concern about working with species different from your own? Sir, I worry that different species might have different capabilities that could affect team performance, Jiwoo replied in a careful tone. Wrong answer, Veltar said firmly. The correct answer is that you have no concerns because every cadet in this academy receives identical training and uses identical equipment. Individual differences become irrelevant when everyone operates under the same parameters. Near the IE, Human Group Park Minji raised one of her 4 Centauri arms. Commander, what if certain species naturally excel at different types of tasks? Then those species will learn to perform all tasks at the same level as everyone else, or they will fail, Veltar responded. Natural advantages create unfair battlefield conditions. Standardized training eliminates those advantages and creates truly equal warriors. Hana felt Do-hyun shift uncomfortably beside her. During their preliminary training on Titan Station, their human instructors had mentioned that some academies treated different species differently. They had been told to expect modifications to standard equipment or adjusted training schedules. But Commander Veltar seemed to take pride in offering none of those accommodations. Now you will be assigned to your training stations, Veltar announced. Each station contains identical equipment calibrated to galactic standard specifications. You will learn to master this equipment regardless of your species' limitations. Maintenance crews will inspect all equipment weekly to ensure it remains within standard parameters. The cadets began moving toward their assigned stations. Hana found herself at Station 47 near the center of the training deck. The plasma rifle felt heavier in her hands than the modified versions they had used during preliminary training. The combat suit seemed to fit properly, but felt somehow restrictive around her shoulders and chest. The training dummy looked exactly like the ones at every other station. As she began her first equipment check, Hana noticed a maintenance worker approaching her station. The tall mechanic species engineer carried a tablet and several warning labels. He started attaching bright yellow warnings to various pieces of equipment around her station. "Excuse me," Hana said politely. "Is there something wrong with my equipment?" The maintenance worker looked up with his large, multifaceted eyes. "Not wrong exactly, but these components will need more frequent inspection than standard protocol requires. Weekly replacement for some items, daily checks for stress fractures, enhanced safety monitoring for power systems." "Why?" Hana asked. "Is my equipment defective?" "Not defective," the worker replied as he continued attaching warning labels. "Just rated for different operational parameters than standard issue. Your training station will require specialized maintenance schedule." Across the training deck, Commander Veltar noticed the maintenance activity at Station 47. His golden eyes narrowed as he watched the worker attach multiple hazard warnings around the human cadet's equipment. This was exactly the kind of special treatment he had spent years eliminating from his academy. Every cadet was supposed to use identical equipment under identical conditions. He strode quickly across the deck toward Station 47. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded as he approached the maintenance worker. "Sir, these warning labels are required by safety protocol," the worker replied. "This station requires enhanced monitoring due to projected usage patterns." "Remove them immediately," Veltar ordered. "Every station in this academy uses identical equipment with identical maintenance schedules. I will not have special markings that single out individual cadets." "But sir, the safety calculations indicate—" "I do not want to hear about safety calculations," Veltar interrupted. "I want to hear about equal treatment. Either this equipment is safe for all cadets or it is not safe for any cadets. Remove the warnings." The maintenance worker hesitated, then began peeling off the yellow labels. "Sir, I need you to sign a waiver acknowledging that standard maintenance protocol may not be sufficient for this station." "I will sign no such thing," Veltar said firmly. "Standard protocol applies to every station equally. If you believe the equipment is inadequate, then replace it with equipment that meets galactic standards." Hana watched this exchange with growing confusion. She had not requested any special treatment. In fact, she preferred to blend in with the other cadets rather than stand out. But something about the maintenance worker's concern seemed genuine. "Even if she did not understand the technical details, Commander," she said carefully. "If there are safety issues, I am happy to use different equipment that does not require special maintenance." "There are no safety issues," Veltar replied sharply. "There is only one cadet who thinks she deserves different treatment than everyone else. You will use the same equipment as every other cadet in this academy, and you will maintain it according to the same schedule as everyone else." The maintenance worker gathered his tools and warning labels, then walked away, shaking his large head. As he left, he muttered something about documentation requirements and safety compliance reports that neither Veltar nor Hana could quite hear. "Cadet Lee," Veltar said, as he turned back toward Hana. "You are new to this academy, so let me make something very clear. Every being who trains here receives identical treatment. I do not care what accommodations you might have received at previous training facilities. Here you will succeed or fail based on your ability to meet the same standards as everyone else." "Yes, sir," Hana replied. "I understand, but as commander—" Veltar walked away. She wondered why her equipment had required those warning labels in the first place. The plasma rifle felt normal in her hands. The combat suit fit properly. The training dummy looked exactly like all the others. She could not see any obvious differences that would require special maintenance or safety monitoring. Around the training deck, other cadets were beginning their first exercises with their assigned equipment. Everything seemed to be working normally for everyone. Hana decided that whatever concerns the maintenance worker had were probably just overly cautious safety procedures that Commander Veltar was right to eliminate. She raised her plasma rifle and began the standard target practice, routine that every cadet was required to master. 3 weeks into the training cycle, strange things began happening around Station 47. The first incident occurred during routine plasma rifle practice, when Hana's weapon suddenly stopped firing after only 2 hours of use. The power cell that was supposed to last for 8 hours of continuous training had somehow been completely drained. Equipment malfunction at Station 47 announced the automated monitoring system. A maintenance worker hurried over to examine the weapon while Hana stood waiting with her hands at her sides. "Did you modify the power settings?" the worker asked as he ran diagnostic scans on the plasma rifle. "No, sir," Hana replied. "I used exactly the same settings as everyone else." The worker frowned as he looked at his readings. "The power cell is completely empty, but there are no signs of malfunction or energy leakage. The weapon appears to have fired exactly as designed, but consumed 4 times the expected energy." Commander Veltar approached the station with his forearms crossed behind his back. "What is the problem here?" "Sir, the plasma rifle has exhausted its power cell ahead of schedule," the worker reported. "All systems are functioning normally, but energy consumption exceeded projected parameters. Then replace the power cell and continue." "Training," Veltar ordered. "Equipment failures happen randomly throughout the academy. One incident does not indicate any pattern, but over the following days, more incidents began occurring at Station 47. Hana's training dummy required replacement after developing stress fractures that ran completely through its reinforced core. The combat suit showed unusual wear patterns along the joints and pressure points. The weapon maintenance tools developed tiny cracks after just a few uses. Other cadets started to notice the frequent equipment changes at Hana's station. Do-hyun mentioned it during their evening meal in the academy cafeteria, where cadets from different species sat together at long tables, sharing stories about their training progress. "I have never seen maintenance crews visit any station as often as they visit yours," Do-hyun said as he ate his regulation protein ration. "Yesterday they replaced your training dummy for the 3rd time this week. I do not understand it either," Hana replied quietly. "I am following exactly the same procedures as everyone else. The equipment just seems to wear out faster at my station, Yoon." Jiwoo looked up from his meal with his reptilian eyes showing curiosity. "I have been observing the incidents from my station nearby. The patterns do not match standard equipment failure modes. Normal wear and tear should be distributed randomly across all stations, but 90% of equipment replacements have occurred at stations assigned to human cadets." "That cannot be correct," said Park Minji, as she used 2 of her forearms to manipulate her eating utensils. "The Academy uses identical equipment for all species. If human stations are experiencing more failures, then humans must be using the equipment incorrectly." Hana felt her face grow warm with embarrassment. "I am being very careful with all my equipment. I follow maintenance procedures exactly as taught. I do not understand why things keep breaking." What none of the cadets knew was that maintenance reports were piling up in Commander Veltar's office. Equipment failures at human stations were occurring at rates that exceeded statistical probability by enormous margins. Plasma rifles were burning out power cells twice as fast as expected. Training dummies were developing structural damage that should have been impossible under normal use conditions. Combat suits were stretching beyond their designed flexibility limits. The maintenance chief had requested a meeting with Veltar to discuss the unusual failure patterns, but the commander kept postponing the appointment. He was convinced that acknowledging species differences in equipment needs would undermine everything he believed about equal treatment. During combat simulation exercises, the problems became more obvious. Hana's squad was assigned a routine training scenario that involved breaching a fortified position using standard tactics and equipment. The simulation was designed to test teamwork and proper use of gear rather than individual capabilities. As the exercise began, Hana found herself unconsciously adjusting her grip on the plasma rifle to compensate for what felt like loose connections in the weapon housing. Without thinking about it, she tightened several components that seemed to be rattling during movement. Her squad mates noticed her making these modifications, but assumed she was just being extra careful with her equipment. "Why do you keep adjusting your weapon?" asked Minji as they prepared to advance on the simulated enemy position. It feels unstable, Hana replied, like components are not properly secured. My weapon feels exactly the same as always, Minji said. Standard equipment should not require constant adjustment. But as the exercise continued, Hana's instinctive modifications seemed to improve her weapon's performance. Her shots were more accurate, and her power cell lasted longer than expected. When her squad successfully completed the exercise ahead of schedule, the other team members were impressed but confused. How did you make your rifle fire with greater accuracy? Jiwoo asked afterward. The targeting systems are standardized across all equipment. I just tightened some loose parts, Hana said. The weapon felt more stable afterward. Jiwoo examined his own plasma rifle carefully. I detect no loose components in my weapon. All connections appear to be within normal specifications. Commander Veltar watched the post-exercise discussions with growing suspicion. Human cadets seemed to be making unauthorized modifications to their equipment during training. This was exactly the kind of behavior that could lead to demands for specialized gear or different training protocols. He decided to review security recordings from recent training sessions to document these equipment modifications. What he found in the recordings troubled him greatly. Hana and other human cadets were regularly making small adjustments to their gear that appeared to improve performance. But when he examined the same equipment after training sessions, everything appeared to be within normal specifications. The mystery deepened when maintenance crews began reporting that equipment assigned to human stations required complete replacement, far more frequently than identical equipment used by other species. Combat dummies that lasted months at other stations were lasting only days when assigned to human cadets. Plasma rifles were being retired due to internal component wear that should have taken years to develop. This cannot continue, Veltar announced during a meeting with his training staff. Either human cadets are deliberately damaging equipment to gain attention, or they are being provided with defective gear by maintenance crews who want to give them special treatment. His assistant instructor pointed out that security recordings showed human cadets handling their equipment with the same level of care as everyone else. Sir, there is no evidence of deliberate damage or misuse. The equipment failures appear to be related to normal training activities. Then explain why identical equipment lasts 4 times longer when used by other species, Veltar demanded. The laws of physics do not change based on who is holding a plasma rifle. But privately, Veltar was beginning to have doubts about his assumptions. The equipment failure patterns were too consistent to be random and too universal among human cadets to be explained by individual behavior differences. Something was happening that he did not understand. Late one evening, he decided to personally observe a training session involving human cadets. He positioned himself in the observation deck overlooking the main training floor, where Hana and several other humans were practicing combat maneuvers. What he saw confused him even more. Hana appeared to be unconsciously making tiny adjustments to her equipment throughout the training session. She would subtly shift her grip on the plasma rifle or adjust the fit of her combat suit without seeming to realize she was doing it. The modifications were so small and natural that they would be easy to miss during casual observation. But more puzzling was the fact that after each small adjustment, her equipment seemed to perform better. Her rifle fired more accurately. Her suit moved more smoothly. Her training dummy absorbed impacts without showing the stress fractures that had been developing at her station. When the training session ended, Veltar came down to the main floor to examine Hana's equipment personally. Everything appeared to be in perfect working order with no signs of the wear and tear that had been requiring frequent replacements, Cadet Lee, he said as she prepared to return her gear to the equipment storage area. I observed you making modifications to your equipment during training. Explain these adjustments. Sir, I was not aware that I made any modifications, Hana replied honestly. I was just trying to use the equipment as effectively as possible. Veltar examined her plasma rifle carefully. The weapon appeared to be in better condition than when it had been issued to her at the beginning of the training session. Components that had shown signs of wear earlier in the day now seemed to be functioning within optimal parameters. Your equipment appears to be in excellent condition, he said slowly. Yet maintenance reports indicate this same gear has been scheduled for Replacement due to excessive wear. I do not understand that either, sir, Hannah said. I try to take good care of all my equipment. As she walked away, Commander Veltar remained standing in the empty training hall, holding her plasma rifle, and wondering how the same equipment could be simultaneously wearing out too quickly, and per Commander Veltar decided he needed answers. The equipment failures around human cadets had become impossible to ignore, and his policy of equal treatment was being questioned by maintenance staff and other instructors. He scheduled meetings with the Academy's medical officer and chief engineer to investigate what was really happening. Dr. Kang Woo-jin arrived at the commander's office carrying a thick data tablet filled with medical records and species compatibility reports. The human medical officer had been quietly monitoring the health and performance of human cadets since their arrival at the Academy, but had not been asked to share his findings until now. Doctor, I need you to explain why human cadets are having so many equipment problems, Veltar said as he gestured for Woo-jin to take a seat across from his desk. Are they physically incapable of handling standard galactic equipment properly? Dr. Kang looked uncomfortable as he opened his data files. Commander, the situation is more complex than equipment compatibility issues. Human physiology has some unusual characteristics that were not fully disclosed when Earth joined the galactic community. What kind of characteristics? Veltar asked. With growing impatience, humans evolved on what galactic classification systems call a death world. Woo-jin replied carefully. Earth has environmental conditions that most spacefaring species would consider lethal or extremely dangerous. Gravity levels that would crush many beings. Atmospheric composition that is toxic to most life forms. Radiation exposure from an unstable star. Predator species that hunt in coordinated groups. Veltar felt his forearms tense as he processed this information. Are you telling me that humans are physically stronger than other species? Not exactly stronger, Woo-jin said, but adapted to operate under conditions that other species cannot survive. Human bone density is approximately 3 times galactic average. Muscle fiber efficiency exceeds standard parameters by significant margins. Nervous system response times are faster than most measurement equipment can accurately record. Then, why was this information not included in their Academy files? Veltar demanded. Because Earth's government was concerned about discrimination, Woo-jin explained. Many species have negative reactions to Death World inhabitants. They are often viewed as dangerous or unstable. Human Diplomatic Corps specifically requested that physiological data be classified to prevent prejudice from affecting their integration into galactic society. Before Veltar could respond, his office door chimed to announce the arrival of Chief Engineer Rothgar. The massive mechanic species engineer had to duck slightly to fit through the doorway as he entered, carrying his own collection of data tablets and equipment analysis reports. Commander, I have completed my investigation into the equipment failure patterns, Rothgar announced in his deep mechanical voice. The results are quite remarkable, explain, Veltar ordered. Human cadets are not damaging equipment through misuse, the engineer reported. They are operating equipment at performance levels that exceed design specifications. Standard galactic equipment is calibrated for species with average strength and reflexes. Human physiology allows them to utilize these devices beyond their intended capacity. Rothgar activated a holographic display showing detailed analysis of plasma rifles used by different species. When a typical cadet fires this weapon, the energy discharge follows expected patterns within safe operational limits. When human cadets fire the same weapon, their faster reflexes and steadier grip allow them to achieve much higher accuracy rates, which causes the targeting systems to work harder to compensate. The weapons are performing better when humans use them, Veltar asked in confusion. Exactly, Rothgar confirmed. But this improved performance pushes components beyond their designed stress limits. Power cells drain faster because targeting computers are processing more precise firing solutions. Weapon barrels experience greater thermal stress because shot placement is more consistent. Training dummies develop stress fractures because impacts are delivered with greater force and accuracy. Dr. Kang added more data to the holographic display. We have observed similar patterns with other equipment. Combat suits stretch beyond normal limits because human muscle development exceeds the flexibility range the suits were designed to accommodate. Maintenance tools develop stress cracks because human grip strength applies forces that exceed the tool's design parameters, so the equipment is not failing, Veltar said slowly, as understanding began to dawn. It is being used more effectively than it was designed to handle, correct? Both the doctor and engineer confirmed simultaneously. Veltar sat back in his chair, feeling like his entire worldview was shifting beneath him. For 15 years he had believed that identical treatment created fairness and equality, but now he was learning that identical equipment could not accommodate the natural differences between species. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "Specialized equipment calibrated for human physiology," Rothgar suggested. "Plasma rifles with enhanced power cells and reinforced components. Combat suits designed for greater flexibility and strength. Training dummies built to withstand higher impact forces." "Absolutely not," Veltar responded immediately. "Specialized equipment creates inequality between species. Some cadets would have advantages over others based on their biology, rather than their training and dedication." Dr. Kang leaned forward in his chair. "Commander, with respect, I think you may be misunderstanding what equality means in this context. True equality requires giving each individual what they need to succeed, rather than giving everyone identical resources. That is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to discrimination and preferential treatment," Veltar argued. "If we start making exceptions for humans, what prevents other species from demanding their own special accommodations? Other species already receive accommodations," Rothgar pointed out. "Atmospheric composition in different sections of the Academy is adjusted for species that breathe different gas mixtures. Lighting levels are modified for species with different visual capabilities. Temperature controls are set differently in various areas to accommodate species with different thermal requirements." Veltar had never thought about these environmental adjustments as special treatment. They had always seemed like basic necessities for maintaining a functional multi-species facility. But as he considered the engineer's words, he realized that even his most basic assumptions about equal treatment had been built on hidden accommodations. "The difference with human equipment needs," Dr. Kang continued, "is that their accommodations are visible and obvious. When a human cadet breaks a training dummy, other cadets can see it happening. When environmental controls adjust atmospheric composition for different species, nobody notices because the changes are invisible." "Are you suggesting that my entire approach to training has been wrong?" Veltar asked. "Not wrong," Wujin replied, diplomatically, "but perhaps incomplete. Equal treatment should mean equal opportunity to succeed rather than identical resources, regardless of individual needs." That evening, Commander Veltar walked alone through the Academy training areas, trying to reconcile everything he had learned. In one section, he noticed the atmospheric controls that automatically adjusted oxygen levels when vegan cadets entered the area. In another section, he saw lighting systems that shifted spectrum and intensity based on which species were present. All around him, the Academy was quietly making hundreds of small adjustments to accommodate different species' needs. But because these accommodations were built into the station infrastructure, rather than visible equipment modifications, he had never thought of them as special treatment. He found himself standing at Station 47, where Hana conducted her daily training. The plasma rifle rack held a weapon that had been replaced just that morning after its predecessor had been retired due to component wear. The training dummy was the fourth one assigned to this station in the past month. Warning labels that maintenance crews kept trying to attach were conspicuously absent. As he examined the equipment more closely, Veltar began to notice details he had overlooked before. The plasma rifle's grip showed subtle deformation patterns, where it had been held by hands that gripped with greater strength than the designers anticipated. The combat suit hanging nearby had stress marks along joints and seams that indicated movement ranges beyond normal flexibility parameters. For the first time, he tried to imagine what it would be like to use equipment that was not designed for his physiology. What if plasma rifles were built for beings with weaker grips and slower reflexes? What if combat suits were designed for species with limited flexibility and lower bone density? Would he be able to perform as well as cadets whose biology matched? The equipment specifications. The thought troubled him deeply because it suggested that his commitment to equal treatment might have been creating unequal opportunities all along. By insisting that every cadet use identical equipment, he might have been giving some species significant advantages while placing others at serious disadvantages. But accepting species differences in equipment needs felt like abandoning everything he believed about fairness and merit-based evaluation. If differifo, the emergency alarm began wailing at 0300 station time, when most cadets were asleep in their quarters. Red warning lights flashed through the corridors as the Academy's automated defense systems detected multiple hostile ships approaching from the outer system. Commander Veltar rushed from his quarters toward the command center as combat instructors throughout the station prepared for battle. "Report," he shouted over the noise of alarms and running crew members. 12 pirate vessels approaching at high speed, replied his communications officer. "They have already disabled the outer defense platforms and are moving toward the Academy. All combat-ready instructors are being deployed to defend critical systems." Veltar felt his blood turn cold as he realized the implications. Nearly every qualified fighter in the Academy would be needed to repel the attack. The cadets would have to be secured in the reinforced quarters and left under minimal supervision until the battle was over. "Seal all cadet areas and activate emergency protocols," he ordered. "No cadet is to leave quarters until the all-clear signal is given." But as the battle began, things went wrong very quickly. Enemy weapons fire damaged primary life support systems, causing atmospheric composition to shift toward toxic levels in several sections of the Academy. Power fluctuations caused artificial gravity to fail in multiple corridors. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, trapping groups of cadets in areas where environmental conditions were rapidly becoming dangerous. In the cadet quarters, Hana woke to the sound of alarms and immediately noticed that the air tasted wrong. The oxygen levels seemed to be dropping, while carbon dioxide concentrations were rising to levels that would soon become lethal for most species. Around her, other cadets were beginning to show signs of respiratory distress. "Something is wrong with life support," Do-Yun said as he struggled to breathe normally. "The air is getting worse." Yoon-Ji-woo was already unconscious from atmospheric poisoning that affected reptilian species faster than mammals. Park Min-ji was using all 4 of her arms to try to seal air leaks around the door, but her efforts were not enough to prevent the steady loss of breathable atmosphere. "We need to get out of here," Hana said as she moved toward the emergency controls. The door systems were locked down under battle protocols, but she could see that environmental conditions outside their quarters were even worse than inside. "The corridors are filled with toxic gas," Minji reported as she checked the external sensors. "We cannot survive out there without protective equipment." "Where is the nearest emergency equipment storage?" Hana asked. 2 levels down in Section C. Do-Hyun replied weakly. "But we cannot reach it through normal corridors. Too much toxic gas and no gravity in most areas." Hana looked at the route displays and realized that reaching the emergency equipment would require traveling through sections where atmospheric conditions would kill most species within minutes. The corridors had no breathable air and were filled with chemical vapors from damaged life support systems. Without thinking about the implications, she moved to the manual door controls and began trying to override the emergency lockdown. Her hands worked quickly to access maintenance panels that were supposed to require special tools. "What are you doing?" Minji asked in alarm. "We cannot go out there without protective gear." "I can reach the emergency equipment," Hana replied as she continued working on the door systems. "The toxic gas levels will not affect humans as severely as other species." This was not entirely accurate, but Hana somehow knew instinctively that she could survive conditions that would quickly kill her friends. She could not explain this knowledge but felt confident that her physiology would allow her to operate in the poisoned corridors long enough to retrieve protective equipment. "That is impossible," Do-Hyun protested. "The sensors show lethal concentrations of industrial chemicals out there." "Then stay here and try to extend your air supply," Hana said as she finally got the door systems to respond. "I will bring back equipment for everyone." Before anyone could stop her, she opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The air immediately burned her lungs and eyes, but did not incapacitate her as it would have other species. She could breathe. the poisoned atmosphere even though it was painful and unpleasant. Moving through the darkened corridors without artificial gravity proved easier than expected. Her stronger bones and muscles allowed her to push off walls and navigate obstacles that would have been impossible for other cadets to handle. When she reached areas where structural damage had created sharp metal debris, she was able to move, pieces that weighed several times what other species could lift. The journey to emergency equipment storage took 20 minutes through conditions that should have killed her within 5 minutes. When she reached the sealed storage compartment, she found that the access controls had been damaged by power surges. The electronic locks were not responding, and the backup manual systems required tools that were not available. Without hesitation, Hana began working on the storage compartment door with her bare hands. The metal components that were designed to prevent unauthorized access bent under pressure that her physiology could generate naturally. Within minutes, she had forced open a storage system that was supposed to be impossible to breach without specialized equipment inside the compartment. She found atmospheric suits designed for emergency evacuations. The suits were built to protect various species during short-term exposure to hostile environments, but had never been tested under current conditions. She loaded as many suits as she could carry and began the return journey to the cadet quarters. Trip back proved even more challenging because she now had to navigate while carrying equipment for multiple people, but her enhanced strength and endurance allowed her to transport protective gear that would have required several people of other species to move. When she finally reached the cadet quarters, she found her friends barely conscious from atmospheric poisoning. "Put these on immediately," she ordered as she distributed the emergency suits. "Do not ask questions until everyone is protected." As the other cadets struggled into their protective gear, Hana checked the corridor conditions again. Life support failures were spreading throughout the academy, and more areas were becoming uninhabitable every few minutes. They would need to move to sections with better environmental controls, but the journey would require traveling through increasingly dangerous territory. "We cannot stay here," she announced once everyone was properly suited. "We need to reach the central command area where life support systems are still functioning. The route displays show that all corridors between here and Central Command are compromised," Minji reported through her suit communication system. "There is no safe path." "Then we make an unsafe path work," Hana replied as she checked the structural damage reports. "Follow me exactly, and do not try to help with obstacles. Some barriers will require more force than your suits can handle." What followed was a journey through conditions that violated every safety protocol in the Academy manual. Hana led her group through corridors filled with toxic gases that would dissolve protective equipment within hours. She cleared debris that blocked passages by moving structural components that officially required mechanical assistance. When they encountered areas where gravitational systems had failed completely, she carried unconscious cadets who could not navigate in zero-gravity conditions. By the time they reached the central command area, Hana's emergency suit was showing stress, damage that should have taken days of exposure to develop. Her friends' suits were in better condition, but their occupants were exhausted from the ordeal of traveling through hostile environment while depending on someone else's strength and endurance. Commander Veltar was coordinating the Academy's defense. From the Central Command Center, when the group of cadets arrived, he looked up in amazement as they entered through an access corridor that had been declared impassable due to environmental hazards. "How did you get here?" he demanded. "That entire section has been sealed off due to toxic atmospheric conditions, Cadet. Lee guided us through the dangerous areas," Minji reported. "She was able to operate in conditions that would have killed the rest of us." Veltar looked at Hana with new understanding. Her emergency suit showed damage patterns that indicated exposure to chemical concentrations far beyond what the protective equipment was designed to handle. Yet she was still conscious and apparently unaffected by conditions that should have been lethal. "You traveled through sections with industrial chemical concentrations at 50 times the lethal dose for most species," he said slowly. "Yes, sir," Hana replied simply. "It was unpleasant, but not impossible." As Veltar looked around at the group of rescued cadets, he finally understood what Dr. Kang and Chief Engineer Rothgar had been trying to tell him. Human physiology was not just different from other species. It was adapted for survival in conditions that other beings could not even imagine enduring. The pirate attack was eventually repelled, but not before it had demonstrated something that changed Commander Veltar's perspective forever. When crisis struck and standard procedures failed, it was not identical equipment or equal treatment that saved lives. It was the unique capabilities of individuals who could operate beyond normal parameters when circumstances demanded extraordinary measures. In the days following the pirate attack, Commander Veltar found himself completely rethinking everything he believed about fairness and equality. The rescue of the cadets had demonstrated that identical treatment was not always the best way to achieve equal outcomes. Sometimes different individuals needed different resources to reach their full potential. He called a meeting with all Academy training staff to discuss new policies that would acknowledge species differences while maintaining fair standards for everyone. The conference room was filled with instructors from various species who had all witnessed how human capabilities had saved lives during the emergency. "I have been wrong about what equality means in a multi-species environment," Veltar announced to the assembled group. "True fairness requires giving each individual what they need to succeed, rather than giving everyone identical resources, regardless of their circumstances." His assistant instructor raised a concern that had been troubling many of the staff. "Commander, how do we maintain objective standards if different species are using different equipment and training protocols?" "We focus on outcomes rather than methods," Veltar replied. "Every cadet must demonstrate the same level of competence in essential skills, but they may use whatever tools and techniques work best for their physiology to achieve those competencies." Dr. Kang had prepared detailed recommendations for implementing species-appropriate training modifications. Humans will need equipment rated for higher strength and faster reflexes. Vegan cadets require environmental controls that accommodate their temperature regulation needs. Centauri students need modified interfaces that work with their forearm coordination patterns. But most importantly, Veltar added, "We need to change our thinking about what makes training fair. Different does not mean unequal if everyone has the opportunity to develop their full capabilities." Over the following weeks, the Academy implemented comprehensive changes to its training programs. Equipment was redesigned or replaced to match the physiological capabilities of different species. Environmental controls were adjusted for optimal performance, rather than one-size-fits-all compromise solutions. Training scenarios were modified to challenge each species appropriately, while maintaining consistent skill standards. At Station 47, Hana found herself working with plasma rifles that had enhanced power cells and reinforced components, designed to handle the precision and force that human physiology could generate. Her training dummy was built from materials that could withstand impact levels that would have destroyed the previous standard equipment. But the changes were not limited to human stations. Throughout the training deck, every species now had equipment and environmental settings optimized for their specific needs. Warning labels appeared at every station, indicating the specialized requirements and capabilities associated with different types of equipment. These warning labels do not indicate weakness or special privileges, Veltar announced during a training session. They indicate recognition of the diverse strengths that different species bring to our defense forces. The other cadets gradually adapted to the new training environment. Yoon Jiwoo excelled with equipment designed for reptilian neural response, patterns that allowed him to process tactical information faster than previous systems had permitted. Park Minji thrived using interfaces that took full advantage of her forearm coordination capabilities. Most importantly, the equipment failure rates dropped dramatically once each species was working with tools designed for their physiological characteristics. Maintenance crews no longer spent their time constantly replacing broken equipment because everything was being used within appropriate operational parameters. "I still do not understand why the old system seemed to work for so many years," Do-Yun said during one of their evening meals in the cafeteria. "It worked because most species have similar physiological characteristics," Yoon Jiwoo explained. Standard galactic equipment was designed for the average capabilities of typical spacefaring species. Humans and a few other Death World inhabitants are outliers who need different accommodations. So we were never really using identical equipment, Hana realized. We were using equipment designed for some species and forced to work for others. Exactly, confirmed Park Minji. True equality means everyone gets what they need rather than everyone getting the same thing. Commander Veltar found that the new training protocols produced better results across all species. When cadets could focus on developing their skills rather than fighting against inappropriate equipment, their performance improved dramatically. Graduation rates increased and job placement scores reached record levels. The Academy began receiving requests from other training facilities throughout the galaxy, asking for guidance on implementing similar species-appropriate training programs. What had started as a crisis over broken equipment had evolved into a model for effective multi-species cooperation. 6 months after the pirate attack, Veltar stood in his office reviewing the latest performance statistics from his cadets. Every measurable indicator showed improvement over previous training cycles. More importantly, the cadets themselves reported higher satisfaction levels and better confidence in their abilities. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to his office. "Come in," he called out. Hana entered carrying a data tablet with what appeared to be some kind of report. "Sir, I have been working with cadets from other species to document the changes we have experienced under the new training protocols." "What kind of documentation?" Veltar asked as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Comparative performance data showing how species-appropriate training affects skill development," she replied. "We found that every species improved when they could use equipment designed for their capabilities, rather than equipment they had to adapt themselves to use." She activated the tablet display showing detailed charts and graphs. Vegan cadets showed 30% improvement in tactical analysis when they could use interfaces designed for their visual processing capabilities. Centauri students increased their engineering scores by 25% with forearm-compatible tools. Human performance increased across all categories when equipment could handle our strength and reflex capabilities. Veltar studied the data with growing amazement. "These improvements are remarkable. But the most interesting finding," Hana continued, "is that cross-species teamwork also improved significantly. When each species can perform at their optimal level, they contribute more effectively to group activities." This made perfect sense to Veltar as he thought about it. A team where every member was working at their full potential would naturally be more effective than a team where some members were held back by inappropriate equipment or environmental conditions. "Have you shared this data with other academies?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Hana replied. 3 other training facilities have already begun implementing similar modifications to their programs. Early results suggest they are seeing comparable improvements. As she prepared to leave his office, Veltar called her back with one final question. "Cadet Lee, do you feel that the new training protocols give human cadets an unfair advantage over other species?" "No, sir," she answered without hesitation. "I feel like we finally have fair training protocols that allow every species to demonstrate their actual capabilities rather than their ability to work around inappropriate equipment." After she left, Commander Veltar walked to his window overlooking the main training deck. Below him, cadets from dozens of different species were working with equipment designed for their specific needs while training to meet identical performance standards. Warning labels at every station indicated the specialized requirements for different types of equipment and environmental controls. But now those warning labels represented something completely different than they had months earlier. Instead of indicating problems or special treatment, they indicated recognition of the valuable diversity that made the Galactic Defense Forces stronger than any single species could be. Alone, Veltar realized that his original commitment to equal treatment had been based on the assumption that equality meant uniformity. But true equality meant giving everyone the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of what resources they needed to get there. The Academy had become a better place not because it treated everyone the same, but because it treated everyone fairly according to their individual needs and capabilities. The warning labels at Station 47 and every other station throughout the facility now represented a celebration of diversity rather than a source of concern about special treatments. As he watched the cadets training below, Veltar understood that the strongest defense force would be one that utilized the unique strengths of every species, rather than forcing everyone to conform to a single standard that worked well for some and poorly for others. The instructor had indeed vowed equal rules, and he was still committed to that principle. But now he understood that equal rules meant equal opportunities, rather than identical treatment.